my great pleasure to introduce Karen Fry Weisbrich, and she's going to take it from here.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to have a microphone that works. This is great. I'm going to step up here for a minute and then I'm going to go back. I want to thank the Grand Lake Historical Society. Should I go over here with you telling me? Thank you. Okay. This is my coach. Thank you. Will O'Donnell is my coach. I want to thank the Grand Lake Historical Society for asking me to do this. And I will tell you, it's just been an incredible journey for me to find all these photos of my family. Some of them I found on internet, etc. And I just want to honor my ancestors, 6 and 7 generations back that came to Colorado from Kansas and Texas. I also want to thank some people who really, okay, can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I want to thank some people who really helped me put this together. The Blakely family, and they're like family to me. They are my family tonight, and I appreciate it so much. And so she's over here, but Viv, and if you can hear me, she is my godchild, and so is her sister, and I just love them to pieces, and they've helped me with this whole production. And then I have a mother of my godchild here too, and we all got together because of this place called Grand Lake. I also have this lovely lady here, right there, and she is a very special lady in my family's life, Mary Singer. So enough about special people, because we can talk on and on about that. I'm going to go sit over here, and what I'm going to do is, I hope we get a better microphone. I hope you can hear me, and if not, I'll just keep, yelling. And I'm wearing my badge tonight for one reason, and I'm going to end this with the importance of volunteering in Grand Lake, Colorado. That is the reason why I have it, and it's one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. Got that out of the way, or I'll cry. Okay, so everybody, I hope you can hear me because I'm sitting down. Everybody okay?
Hold the microphone closer to your mouth.
The microphone is dead.
It's dead.
We're trying to figure
Okay.
it out. Anybody work for the city?
Let me see about that.
Do we need to
Where is your battery if you have one?
volunteer?
You might have to go without for a second.
Okay, I'm going to stand up then. Should we take a break? I've already said enough. Actually, tonight is brought to us by Bob Scott and Blue Brand. They have told me I get a 30% discount. If I wear. And if somebody wants to give $1,000 to the Grand Lake Historical Society tonight, I will give them this because Bob Scott and Lou Brand will replace it, okay? So how many takers? $1,000. Okay, $1,500. Am I good? Okay.
Here, go.
Can you hear me now? Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. It's so wonderful to see so many friends here tonight. Somebody just waved to me and I love it. And thank you so much. So I'm going to sit back down. And like I said, I've really enjoyed this process of finding all these photos about my family. And what I keep thinking is, why do we have these generation to generation love? What is it? What is it that they kept saying, I love it enough to not sell the property and make sure it's there for my descendants? And it is absolutely the attitude that they get about what they are giving the next generation and the generation they don't know. And it's about that attitude, and it's about Grand Lake making ordinary lives extraordinary. And it gives us extraordinary moments. Okay, so we're going to get started here. And this is a story of two sisters and their families from out of state traveling to Colorado and Grand Lake. This is my mother, my grandfather, mother, grandfather, my uncle, my Aunt Esther, and that's Aunt Leah Bell. Wow. And that was from the 30s, okay? So, now is the family tree, please. Next. Yes, here we go. So this isn't my full family tree, but these are the people who have come up generation to generation. And I'm really proud to say that all of these people, you know, pretty much outside of Durrell Cannon and Kay Cannon have just continually come until it was time where they had to sell for whatever reason. And this is 6 generations, and 5 generations represented here are all from out of state. We now have all of these new Colorado people that are in our family that they decided to leave Texas or Kansas and stay in Colorado. So we lost them to a better place. It's okay. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, this is a tribute to my great-great-grandfather, Duff. He was Lewis Duff. And that is not a painting of him. I found this, if anybody's ever been to Round Top Antique Fair, I think I spent $300 on this painting, but I loved it because my great-great-grandfather Duff was a wagon train master. And he had bright red hair, and he was just, the whole family. I grew up on legends about this man. 3 generations always told me stories about him. So this is Duff to me. I love his attitude. I love how he's leaning against the, you know, the wagon. So now I want to tell you a little bit about him. So he started out from Kansas. They lived around Horton, Kansas. And he decided he heard the call of the West. And in 1859, he left Atchison, Kansas on May 10th and went with this wagon train. He worked it. Went with the wagon train to this little town. It was a sleepy mining town in Colorado. They got there mid-July 1859, and that little mining town was called Denver. Isn't that something? And so from there, they tried to sell their wares, and they were not able to sell their wares. So as my mother raised me on this story, they went to the booming metropolis of Las Vegas, New Mexico, and they sold their wares. The next trip that they went on, they went to, one of the stops was Central City, Colorado. They took a 7,500-pound boiler to a mining camp up there. Can you hear it? Oh yeah, wait, this is still the right one. So they went, driving from Atchison with a 7,500-pound boiler. Well, it fell off the truck somewhere, and I don't know where. But here they had a wagon train of several different men and wagons. Somehow, I don't know how they did it, but they got it back on the wagon, and it had a dent, but they delivered it, and it was useful, and it was accepted as where in elevation 8510 Central City. Wow. Which I think is a pretty amazing thing. So Duff was quite an entrepreneur, and we all called him Duff. He was Lewis Duff, but everybody called him Duff. So he put together his own wagon train so he could officially be called Wagon Train Master or Freight Master. So for about the next 2 decades, he went back and forth between Kansas and between Colorado. He also went to Utah and also to New Mexico. He followed the Oregon Trail or the Santa Fe Trail. Now, if you went on the Oregon Trail, 1 out of every 10 people who went on that died. So this was not an easy deal, but he really loved it. He had his full train and of men that helped him. And so he carried things such as, I don't know how he did this, 8,000 pounds of ham, 2,500 pounds of bacon. One time he did 4,000 pounds of gold, and that was a very clandestine, secret deal. He went by himself, and he thought that was probably the most frightening thing that he had ever done, that he knew he could get killed like that. He was not killed, obviously. And then he brought China to Colorado, etc. So the fear of Indians was always really real, and he always had a gun and a rifle nearby. He and his men were lucky because it seemed that they missed raids by 1 or 2 days every time they heard about it. Somebody else, sadly had been attacked. In the early years, he had Kit Carson as a guide over time to navigate these, and protect them past the Indians. He had a man on his team that I always heard about. This as a legend with my whole family. His name was McGee, and he was this wonderful man, but he always wore a hat. And finally, my great-great-grandfather understood why. He took off the hat at church, and he had been scalped, and he survived. And so he saw the horrific story, what that told. So McGee was in 2 more Indian raids, and he survived both. The last one, he was the only one who survived out of 10, and the other ones were also scalped. So the only time that he really had something with the Indians was when he had a cavalry leading him, and they were quietly trying to go past an Indian camp, and the dogs woke everybody up. So the cavalry went in and killed all of them, which in his diary he said, and all of this, by the way, is from his diary. He said he did not agree with this, but they did find the scalp of a young blonde girl on one of the warriors. So that probably did save his life. So, okay, enough about that. But here's his personal life. And this is where, we're talking about Colorado, which I think is a part of Grand Lake history too. He married a wonderful lady named Leah Duff. Leah is a family name of ours. And she was just a loving, wonderful woman, a mother who raised 4 children, because he was gone quite a bit of the time. And I don't know that he even knew if they had a child on the way. He'd be gone for 6 or 8 months, or if he was able to be there for the births. I really don't know. So 2 daughters. Grace Duff Snyder, that was my great-grandmother, who was a wonderful woman. And then she was married to Charles Wesley Snyder, and my great-great-aunt, and that was her sister, Nerva Duff Moore. The 2 sisters went to University of Kansas, class of 1895, and they were just, they were really good pals. So a major trip and turning point was when the 2 sisters took my great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother in 1912. They took them by train to Estes Park. And at that point, the family got hooked on, the whole family got hooked on Colorado. And I can't help but think, what did my great-great-grandfather think? It took him 9 weeks to get to something like Estes Park, and it was probably less than a week. So I wish I could talk to this man, I've got to tell you. So Grace and her husband, my great-grandmother, continued to return to Colorado for about multiple years, and they'd spend a month in Estes Park, and then a month at the Broadmoor to get out of the Texas heat. Duff's wife preceded him in death, and he spent the rest of his life in Corpus Christi, where he took up golf. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. He played every day that he could until his death. Duff traded a rifle for a golf club and had a very wide array of adventures for his whole life. What a wonderful man. So let's go to the next photo. And this is the trip in 1912. So that's Leah Duff, my great-great-grandmother. My great-grandmother's behind her. The other lady that is, just to her side, that is Nerva. And then over there at the very far is a little girl, and that's my grandmother, Helen. So that was their first trip to Estes Park. So I hope y'all appreciate these stories, because they're not Grand Lake, but I think they're so much a part of everything. Okay, the next photo, please. So this is in 1929. This is my great-grandfather, Charles Snyder. That's my mother. She was probably, how old would y'all say? A little bit over a year, etc. And I always wondered, and this is in Estes Park, and it might be the day that they decided to go over to Grand Lake. They decided they wanted to do a side trip, and at some point they went over to Grand Lake, And they said, we're never gonna vacation in Estes Park again. Wise move. So that is why we are in Grand Lake. But I also, for this photo, I also wondered, at what point did they start driving from Texas? I mean, that was really quite an endeavor. And this photo tells me he was a Cadillac man. And I looked it up, and that is a Cadillac. And the way you can tell is the hood ornament. Cadillac traded out different hood ornaments for about 8 or 9 years, and I was able to pretty much identify that. So anyhow, here's what my grandfather told me, who is the son-in-law of Charles Wesley Snyder. So he said the trip up to Grand Lake was really quite interesting and hard. It was very hard because in the 20s and the 30s, there were no interstates, and especially in the Texas Panhandle. So everybody would take their cars, and of course, some of these already had tires on them, but they would strap more tires on them. And the way they would figure out how to go across the wonderful, plain, no trees in sight kind of panhandle was they would look for the ruts and follow those, and they would look for the discarded tires, and they knew they were on the right path. Isn't that fun? So, not for them, but fun to tell the story. So then, they always loved the Broadmoor, but they arrived in Colorado Springs, and they would check into a very sweet, wonderful little inn. They would bathe, they would change their clothes, I bet they got their car washed, and then they would drive over and check into the Broadmoor. And that was the family tradition. Isn't that funny? So then from there, they would go over Berthoud Pass, and there would be a tree that was attached to the back of the car, and that was added brakes for going over Berthoud Pass. Chris Rusk, am I right about that? Isn't that how they did it? Thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I want to move on now. I want to tell you a little bit about Grace Snyder. Next photo, please. This is Charles, my mother, and that is my great-grandmother, and that is behind him, and that is Grace Snyder, and that's Leah Bell over there. And Leah Bell was a sweet woman, and she didn't talk very much. And I think now I know that maybe she had some issues, but I will give it to my great-grandmother and her sister. She was a niece, and she was always included, whether she could talk or not. And I think that says a lot for that time. So my great-grandmother was just a force. So I want to tell you a little bit about her because it's important to see, how they lived elsewhere and what Grand Lake meant to them and how it transformed them. So my great-grandparents lived in Illinois. They had Helen, their daughter, and then he got the calling to go to Wichita Falls, Texas to be part of a bank. And at that time also, there was this thing called Boomtown, and all of a sudden there was an oil strike in the old Burke Burnett field. So that changed their lives because the banking and the town, it was 100,000 population, just ignited, and all the people there. It's just very exciting to be a part of that town at now its new infancy. So at that time, everything was very formal. And my great-grandmother, Grace, was very formidable. She was matriarchal. She was one of the matriarchs of this town. She was just a delight. She was so, so sweet to me. But man, I bet she really could rule if she needed to. In fact, I've heard that. And she had a spine of steel. So I love this story about Wichita Falls. After Charles died, she decided it was time to sell the house. And so therefore, also businesses were moving in around their lovely home. And they got an offer on the house. And Will O'Donnell, and Donna, you'll appreciate this, a mortuary wanted to buy it. And she said, I will not have my beautiful home turned into a mortuary. She refused to sign it, and next thing we know, she had the house torn down. It was a beautiful home, but she was not going to let her home be a mortuary. This woman had a message that she would, so she was not afraid to go against the grain, and this is something I'm really proud about her. It was a time in the 20s in Wichita Falls when it was easier for some to look away in sad situations than help. Not Grace. She heard that several children were homeless, about 5 to 7, and they were abandoned and some had very significant needs. There was no human services to rely on. Sorry, I'm not getting emotional. I promised I wouldn't do this. She found housing for these kiddos. She hired a caregiver, and she took care of their day-to-day needs. And this was a relationship that lasted quite a long time. I had the privilege in the 50s and the 60s to meet 2 of these people from the 20s. She stayed in touch with them. One was severely malnourished, had rickets, very, handicapped, and she stayed in touch with him until he died. That's who she was. Okay, now, I'm going to tell you something else about her. She was matriarchal, but not only for our family, but the town too. And she was a Methodist. She never smoked. She never drank. She never played cards on Sunday until, I'm sorry my brother is not here to hear this. I want to see if he remembers this. We had dinner with her one Sunday night and we asked her to play Go Fish with us, the cards. And she said, I can't. I do not play cards on Sunday. And my brother and I went, oh, come on, Gaga Grace, can't you? She did it, and I bet she prayed for days for forgiveness. She and Charles loved everything Methodist and gave their time and money generously. Anything that had Methodist associated with it, Southern Methodist University, yes. Anything Methodist, she would go for. And they would go for. But quite frankly, I know that they really wanted to save souls and bring them to the Methodist family, but they also wanted to keep ahead of those Baptists in Wichita Falls. And they did. And every time I visited with her in the 60s, she would say, oh, those Baptists, oh, those Baptists, So she had beautiful dinner parties. There were actually supper parties after church service. And they would always try to invite people over that they knew the Baptists were trying to get to. And she really was a woman with a mission. So from time to time, they would invite their minister and his family, and the minister's name was Dr. John Tower. That name may sound familiar. His son, who attended those luncheons, became Senator John Tower for Texas, and he was senator for about 30 or 40 years. So in the late 90s or 80s, he took me out for lunch, and we just talked, and because he was a friend of my dad, and he said, and he had the oratory skills of a Methodist minister, So he said, Karen, I want to tell you, I can't repeat it, I can't imitate him, but he said, of all the people I met from childhood until I ended my career as senator, and I met world leaders all over, all the major world leaders for 30 years. There was only one person I was afraid of. I thought he was going to say Fidel Castro. Guess who he said? Grace Snyder. And I immediately said, not my great-grandma, not Gaga Grace. She was nothing but sweet to me. That was really shocking to me. But again, she was a formidable force. So one last thing. Finally, Grace only wore dresses. So in the morning, she would wear morning dresses to meet with, people to help with the house. And then in the evening, as tradition for the Mores at that time, she would change into receiving clothes for the people who called on her. And that happened and continued until she died. So here's what happened to her when she went to Grand Lake. She could wear pants. Here she is. And you know what? I found these photos 10 years ago. And I wanted you to know how formal she was. And there she is, Grace and Nerva. And she had freedom all of a sudden in a different way than we all could understand. So there she is in the far photo in the middle. That is, Nerva always outdressed her and really was an imp. And then there's Grace at the top, and that is her grandson. And then over here is Grace. Look at her face as she's trying to teach her daughter how to fish. They loved to fish. These two sisters, I couldn't find photos in Grand Lake of them together unless they were fishing. Every everybody must have loved taking pictures of these two sisters. These are just some of them. And I think it just captures what Grand Lake gives to people, and to give something that is far beyond what they've done, give them the freedom to be themselves in a whole different way, and appreciate what they have done, but just expand. So I really love these. And then next slide, please. So here's one more. This is Nerva. And I love this. She was over 60 years old when she was running through the woods. If that isn't freedom, if that isn't joy, and if that isn't a smile on her face, I mean, wouldn't we all love to be able, at 60 plus, to just run through the woods holding a fishing rod and maybe catch a fish? So I love that photo. Next. Okay, here's the last one I love. This is at the North Inlet. Because by then, both of them had houses in Grand Lake. One was from Kansas, one was from Texas, and they were able to get back together and have at their family homes in Grand Lake. So this is the North Inlet. And I just love that now I appreciate so much that Grand Lake gave these two sisters who were best friends the time together that they wouldn't have been, because it was so hard to travel. Okay, next please. Okay, so now we're going to talk about, these are fun stories. These are all from Nerva's family, these next photos. I found them on the internet, believe it or not. So this is the Bohannon family, Nerva's daughter, that bought, and I'll tell you the story about that house. But here's Nerva and her family, and that's my mother, the little girl. And this is how they went on a hike. I had to show this because look at their outfits. I mean, aren't we lucky? Okay, next photo, please. Okay, this is a fun photo for my family. And on the far right, or whatever it is, on your left, yeah, the little girl that's my mother. This is the house they rented in Grand Lake after they made that joyous decision not to go to Estes Park. This is the house that they lived in for several years and rented. And that house is next door to the home that my parents bought in 1968. And I think that's just a wonderful karma. This is a wonderful photo of my mother. You know, you can probably tell where that is. That's the channel. And she was probably about 8 or so there. So Nerva's family, the Bohannons, didn't have a house at that time in Grand Lake, so they would go to the Holsworth Ranch. And they would go to the Holsworth Ranch probably for about 5 to 7 years. So next photo, please. And here it is. Here they are at Holsworth. Again, Thai. They're playing miniature golf. And then look at this other one on the left. That is Esther and Wallace Bohannon. So that is the daughter of Nerva. And Esther was a John Powers model in New York. And you can see it. She knew how to work that camera. Oh my gosh, she knew how to sink into that photo and all that. And Wallace Bohannon, my father loved Wallace Bohannon. He was just a wonderful, wonderful man. And funny, funny, funny. So this was probably one of the first years that they were in Grand Lake, and they were at Holsworth. And that's one of the larger buildings behind them. Next. Okay, so here they are fishing. Darrell Cannon, that's my grandfather. On the left, that's Wallace, and then that is Nerva's husband. And they had quite a haul. Next, please. Okay, I love this photo. We have it framed. Again, look who's in the center of the photo. It is Esther. She's rolling her eyes. And they had a great fishing expedition, and I think that this is her family. That may be my great-grandmother or her sister Nerva behind her. I have no idea. Because, you know, you don't notice anybody else but Esther. Okay, next, please. Okay, so Wallace Bohannon became a very good friend with Johnny Holsworth. And then there's a member of the Beale family there on the horse, and we don't know who the fourth person is. But they went on a really wonderful, long fishing, overnight backpacking trip. And of course, Wallace has to have the coolest jacket on. That's just Jeff Blakely, you need a jacket like that. I can just tell. Okay, next, please. Okay, this is part of their trip. And I don't know, maybe that's Lulu City that they hiked up to and fished. I have no idea. So then here are the three guys in a snowpack Wallace has a cigarette in his mouth. He's probably not even 30 yet. They're just having fun. So next, please. So, away and apart from the fishing, this is a trip that they did in Rocky Mountain National Park. I bet you recognize that that is the Rainbow's Curve. I don't know the first gentleman. That is Esther, and that is Wallace. Don't know the lady. That is my grandmother, always stylish, always stylish. And then that's Leah Bell. Next, please. So this is, again, they found snow up on Trail Ridge, and that is you can tell my mother and her brother by the matching sort of coats. I don't know whose nanny that was. That could have been Wallace, the son of Wallace and Esther. This is an outing, Snyder and Moore extended family outing in 1937 in Grand Lake. My grandmother, big smile, she's holding her son. And then I'm going to go over to my great-grandmother next to my grandfather, and my mother is in front of them. And look how they dress. I mean, I don't know if they ever dressed casually. I mean, pretty amazing. Next photo is, okay, horseback riding, and of course, Wallace has to have a tie on. And this is, they would get horses from the Grand Lake stables, which is no longer there, and that's where the hub is. So, and they really loved to horseback ride. And so we had a lot of horseback riding photos. This has one of the most interesting stories. This is the house that the Bohannons bought. And I just found out this story 3 days ago. They bought it in 1949, but I never knew this story. And my grandparents already had a home on Grand Lake, and that was where, if you know, the Heckendorfs, they sold their house for $20,000 in 1956 to the Heckendorfs. And that house is the last house before you get to town, and Eagles Landing is right next to it. So here's the amazing story about this. So the people who were selling it, this was right at World War II. And they wanted to go back, and they wanted to actually move to Florida. And they had a very nice offer on the house, but it would not cover their expenses to go to Florida because of the cost of gasoline coupons, rationing. So Wallace Bohannon had a company that canned fruit, and he had extra coupons for gasoline. So he struck a deal. And so basically, as I understand it, that house was built with gasoline rationing coupons for World War II. And I think everybody was happy. Those people moved on, and my family got that house. I think that's an amazing story. Okay, so now we're going to talk about family life during World War II. If you notice in these photos, they're all women. I know my grandfather went to London and served there, and my grandmother, she's the blonde over on the other, far left. She drove the whole family from Texas to Colorado, which I think is an amazing deal in 1940. It's not like you had a Texaco on every corner, and what happens if you got a flat tire? But obviously all these women did that. And this is my grandmother there too, always very stylish, and just a fun woman. So I'm going to tell you another story that is not about my family, but it is about wartime in Grand Lake, and it's one of my favorite stories. If any of you guys remember Phyllis Buttram, wonderful woman from Oklahoma, and the Buttram family still has homes on the lake. So Phyllis told me in the 1990s that everybody had to worry about also food rationing. So the Hall family of Hallmark cards, and several people would put crates of chickens, hens, and roosters on the back of their cars so that they could have poultry, they could have eggs, etc. And they would travel from Oklahoma or Texas or wherever to go, up to Grand Lake. But nobody really wanted an invitation to the Hall's house, although they really wanted an invitation to the Hall's house. But it was because they free-ranged the turkey, the roosters and the chickens all over the mountain. And they were the toughest birds. They couldn't cut them, and they didn't want to be impolite, but they couldn't eat the chicken while they were there. So it was always a worry, oh, please don't let me get invited, you know. So those were the issues about World War II that people had to put up with. So anyhow, I loved that story, and absolutely loved Phyllis. She was a wonderful lady. Dyed red hair until she died, I would say. Okay, next photo, please. Okay, this is, now we are after World War II. And you know what? All of a sudden people could get gasoline for the cars, and then obviously for the boats. So this was Wallace, and this was his dream boat to get. It was called a Vintner. And so this is the launching. It came in 1946 on the rails, and that is the site where is now, you know, the Cox's Marina. But this is how they would transport, and see they had rails that would go right into the lake. And then here is the boat, his dream, the White Queen, that was launched. And I just think that's a beautiful boat. I'm sorry we don't still have it on the lake. I think it's incredible. Okay, next please. This is the boat at the Yacht Club in 1961. That's Wallace, who was there standing up. And then there was a wonderful woman in the boat. Actually, she has the hat on. Her name was Thelma Beaglehole, and she was married to Clarence Beaglehole. And you know what? They had to have really great senses of humor with things like that, and they did. So they were really good friends. Sadly, Wallace Bohannon died in 1963 of a heart attack. He was not that old, but he died playing golf on the Grand Lake golf course. And I'll never forget when we heard that he had died. But you know, he died with his boots on. He loved doing golf, and what a way to go in Grand Lake that we all love. Okay, next please. Okay, now these, I need to tell you a little bit about my grandmother, Helen, now. So these are her friends from Wichita Falls, my grandparents' friends. And whether they were invited or not, they would come every summer, you know. They were not gonna miss it. You can tell they all had a lot of fun. So my grandmother, Helen, was a flapper. She was born in the era, you know, of the Roaring 20s, right? So here's what she was. She was a Methodist, sort of. Unlike her mother, she smoked, she drank, she played cards anytime she wanted to. She bobbed her hair, she wore flapper dresses and such. So her wedding gown was specially designed, and she just was so excited about it. And it had a slit of the right size, so it exposed her leg as she walked down the aisle to see her soon-to-be husband. And she looked at him, and he was totally horrified. It was too risque. Think about the dresses now, you know. He was just horrified. Well, she kept the veil, she threw the dress away, and our family still wears the veil. But she was the fun grandmother. So she'd have these parties, and I'll tell you who would come to some of these parties, Scally O'Donnell, and because he was friends with my Uncle Darrell. And the parties were just really fun. But one of the ways that she communicated about parties and such, she had 4 flags that she would raise on their flagpole on the dock. And one was bad day sailing. I don't know what it looked like. Skunk, bad fishing day. She loved to fish. She even told me she cleaned the fish. I don't believe that, but she said she did. Then there was doghouse. That meant that my grandfather was in the doghouse. And then finally there was a big martini glass on that flag. And that meant come in and have a drink. And so that was the most popular flag on the lake, and a lot of people would always take advantage of it, and they would come and they'd have a drink there. And she had parties. So she had one party that we were very grateful for, because a friend called her and said, there were no phones, and somehow she contacted her and said, there's a young man working up at the Grand Lake Lodge. He's a bellhop. And he has his 2 sisters there too. And they're from Dayton, Ohio. I know him, and I think you need to have them down. Well, of course, that meant a party, you know. So she had him down. He walked in, and he took one look at my mother, and he fell in love, and that was Howard Fry, my father. And so he decided he needed to really court her. He brought his guitar, and he played romantic songs like Blue Tail Fly, Jimmy Crack Corn, and she fell in love with him with bad songs like that. I was sort of shocked. So he did go up to my grandmother, and he said, I am in love with your daughter, and I'm going to marry her. He'd known her for about 6 hours, and my grandmother said, whoa, wait a second. But you know what? It happened, and they did. So next slide, please. So this is a photo of them. My mother and my dad are in the middle, and my aunt Pat is on the left. That's my Aunt Marianne, and that's her husband, Ross Krim. And the 2 aunts worked at Grand Lake Lodge for several years, and they were singers. And so they always came out. They were the song leaders anytime there was a bus that came in, and they would greet them and sing. And I just love that about them. And they had wonderful memories of Grand Lake Lodge. Absolutely. Okay, next. Okay, so these are more of the boats. This is my family's boat. And I don't know when they bought it. If anybody knows Chris Crafts, would that be before World II, or after? I just know they were hard to get until a few years after. Anyhow, okay, next slide. Okay, now this is the world's best practical joke. And, okay, do we have a Thompson in the house? Alexander?
We got a couple of Thompsons.
Okay, you guys stand up, stand up, stand up. Okay, this is the son and the grandson of my dad's best friend, Les Thompson. And these guys had so much fun playing practical jokes on each other, didn't they? And this was a Grand Lake tradition. In fact, there should be a whole historical society program about acceptable practical jokes. Because there are some bad ones we can't tell, honestly. But anyhow, so they planned all of these practical jokes, and it took really great execution and really great planning. So this one did not happen in Grand Lake, so it threw my dad entirely. He did not expect this at all. So Les and his wife, Babs, came down to see Mom and Dad in Wichita Falls. And my dad had, I can't believe this, he was 30 years old, and he put a television station on the air as a 30-year-old in the infancy of TV. I mean, that's really quite something. And most of the TV stations did not actually make money at first, but he had a way and managed to make it work where other people copied him. Everybody had to have 2 jobs. Every single person. So he is president, general manager, and kitty show host. And that was my dad. Who all knew my dad? Would you say that that is his personality? So anyhow, this is the set of Uncle Howdy's house party in Wichita Falls, kitty show. And that's my dad underneath the big, elephant. I'm the little girl in the white dress, and 2 over is my sister. And it was so much fun to go on the show. They were all live. They were all live. And so I remember my dad would interview us like man on the town. So he would say, tell me, little girl, what does your dad do? And I remember saying that. I don't know what to say. My dad, So anyhow, so back to the Thompsons. Have you guys ever heard this story? I think so, yeah. Okay. So full execution. So they came in, and you can see Goebel's Dairyland behind it. So that was the sponsor. And so Dad would talk to the kids, and then he would walk them past Homer the milkman. And they all would have a jar of milk and a straw. And then the camera, live TV, would zero in on my dad. And keep in mind, out in TV land, Dad was a celebrity. So all these kids were at home with their milk ready to have it too. Nobody could drink the milk until my dad took a big sip and he'd say, drink up, kids, it's great. And they would all drink up. So enter Les Thompson with the ultimate practical joke. He bribed Homer the milkman, and they filled the milk jar up with maybe 80% vodka and 20% milk. Live TV. And again, this is a Grand Lake joke. This is not about Wichita Falls, Texas. This is the rivalry between these friendships forged in Grand Lake. So the camera comes in, and here's Dad, you know, and here's Dad, and he takes a big schluck, a big sip. He goes, ah! TV's like, ah! He goes, drink Hopkins! It's great! So score one for Dr. Les Thompson. And you know what? And yes, and I will tell you, I think my dad retired as kiddie show host after that. So thank you for letting me show that something outside of Grand Lake, but it is so Grand Lake. Okay, so the next one, there's no photo, but I want to tell you, oh wait, that comes later. Go back to the other, how about that? Or leave it there, it's okay. So I want to tell you about something that happened to my family after we bought our house in 1968 in a wonderful home near Davenhaven, right next to what was the old Davenhaven Lake Lodge. And so in 1971, we were in Wichita Falls in June, getting ready to come up to Grand Lake the next week. And Mom went down the hallway knocking on all of our doors on Saturday morning at 6:30, and she said, please get downstairs in 5 minutes. Don't worry, no one has been killed. No one's dead. So we went downstairs, and Dad said, I want to let you know that somebody set our house in Grand Lake on fire last night. Who else heard this story? I bet Chris Rusk is one of the few. I can't tell you what that meant to a 17-year-old. How horrifying it is. Why would somebody set our house on fire? Mom and Dad said, we have 24 hours to pack for the summer, get up there. The phone started ringing. One of the first people to call, Marv Fisher. And he said, Howard, I got a place for you to stay. You know, the phones just started ringing off the wall, telling us, you have a place to stay. We got up there, we ended up staying at the Thompson house for a couple of months. And so here's what happened. This was a very planned and executed, intended fire. Underneath our house, it was still shuttered, but you could go into our crawl space by opening just easy doors. Somebody had put in there a cardboard box with a Clorox bottle filled with kerosene, surrounded by rags, lit it. After, they also had the same firebomb at the McCadden's house next to us, did not light it. That house did not have shutters on it, so I think they might have worried somebody was there. Then they put kerosene all the way down to the fire lane, lit a tree there. And this was on a Saturday night. So then luckily 2 people were walking by who worked at Davenhaven. They got Tom Sell up, he called the fire department. The fire department went in, volunteered, and somebody had tampered with the 2 fire trucks, and they were disabled. Those couldn't move. What they didn't expect is something wonderful about this building. The movie let out as the fire trucks were supposed to leave, and the fire alarms were going off. People ran out, all these people ran over to our house. Tom Sal was hosing it down as best he could. There was a water brigade that started. Tom Blickensturfer told me how he and his brother came out of the theater. They saw our house on fire. They beached their house on Davenhaven, and there was a bucket brigade, and it put out the house fire, which is amazing. If the movie had gotten out 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after, we would not have had a home. So I think it's a wonderful story and God's grace. But the kindness that our family was shown, this is the good part of this story. People were so incredible. We would be walking downtown and they would come up to us and say, we heard you're the family, total strangers, I know Donna, total strangers. This is what Grand Lake is about. And they would come up and hug us and tell us, hang in there, and people, I mean, it was just unbelievable, the love that was extended to our family. So that really, to me, is the takeaway. Now the fire investigation, not much, sadly. And today's time, you know, it would be on Channel 8 or Channel 9 News in Denver. But I know that one of the friends of Dad said, I wish I could tell you who it was, but I've been told if I do, they will kill my daughters. So people were afraid in Grand Lake, which is terrifying. And our family does know who probably it was, but he was never even, you know, arrested. But he ended up in jail, and he died in jail. And so we're satisfied with that. And so we have our home sweet home.
Was there any clear motive?
Yes, there was clear motive. We had two motives, one of which might have been towards Tom Sal and David Haven Lodge, because it's right in the middle. You know, if they wanted to burn down David Haven Lodge, get the house next door. The other thing was that they thought, and this is crazy, they thought if they burned these houses down, they could buy the land for pennies on the dollar and develop it. Well, they didn't know Grand Lake people, let's face it. You know, look how the troublesome fire, how many people have, you know, been able to rebuild or whatever, but, you know, so that was a story that was really, really quite special to us, but it's all about Grand Lake friendship. So, okay, so if I have time, done it real quickly. I want to end with the story about King Faisal II coming to Grand Lake, okay? Actually, before that, William Jennings Bryan came in 1890, and see that is the gazebo that used to sit on in front of my grandparents' house. So that was before the house was built, and the Heckendorfs had to take it down because it was very fragile. But he spoke, and everybody came by canoe and also rowboat, and because he was running for president. Next, please. Okay, so this is about King Faisal. So the reason why I came to Grand Lake was because he was known as the Boy King. He, at age 3, he became king, but of course he couldn't rule. So there was a regent named Abdul Ali, and that was the crown prince who took care of him. But so he came in 1952. He had gone to Harrow School in London, and he wanted to modernize. This was his goal. He wanted to modernize Iraq by irrigation and such like that. He loved architecture. He actually brought Frank Lloyd Wright in to try to design new buildings in Iraq also. So here he is. He came in for a 5-week tour to find out more about irrigation, etc. So who does he meet first? Yes, Harry Truman. Then he met the mayor of New York. Of course, there's no photo of that. He excused himself. He said, I've got to go see the Brooklyn Dodgers. And look who he got to meet, and that is, you know, Jackie Robinson. And Jackie, they went on a radio show, and he tried to show him how to throw and all this. So he was a really great 14-year-old. He was just really, really a lot of fun, from what my mother said. Next. Okay, so here he is. He is with the head captain of Colorado Patrol, and I tried to find out more about him. So I guess he guarded him, but look, he gave him a cowboy hat too. So my family was very fortunate because the presentation of King Faisal II of Iraq was on our family talk. And so I'm going to tell you about it first. See all the boats? Well, people were watching it, but they had to have a procession. I mean, he is a king, you know. So he started out over at probably David Haven, and there were about 6 boats. I saw the 8mm film that my father took, and we hope to find it someday. We were having trouble finding it. But, so he was in the first boat, and he stood up, you know. And then in all the other boats, they were all layered, you know, 2 per boat of his ministers, of his uncle, the crown prince, everything. And so it was about 5 to 6 boats, Chris-crafts. So if you've ever ridden in a Chris-craft on the wake of another Chris-craft, It is not easy. So here they are, and he's standing there, and all the ministers and such are behind him. You know, they're bouncing around like this, and they look like little toy soldiers. And you know, I felt so sorry for the very last boat because I felt like, oh, those guys are going to fall in the water just watching it, and they didn't. So they landed on my grandparents' dock, and you can see him. He has a hat, and that is the Crown Prince, the regent, and all these other people. And I think people came and watched it by boat. So he was presented to the town. Now, see the red chair? There's a woman holding a child. So that's my grandmother with my sister Sissy. Now this is the legend of the Fry family. My sister's too young to say whether it's true or not. She's 2 years old. She somehow wiggled out of my grandmother's arms. She went running up to the king, wrapped him around the kneecaps, and of course the ministers were all about to faint. You do not do that. So my grandmother, and I know my mother were just dying, he picked her up, he carried her on piggyback, and he played with her. I think he even got down on his hands and knees on the dock. That is a legend, and I just want to believe it's true. So from there, you know the story that he and Johnny Roan took out and sort of absconded with a boat that night, not one of theirs, and rode around Grand Lake. And to me, this story about being in the U.S., this is somebody who's 14 years old acting like a 14-year-old, and probably the only 2 times in his life when he could be a kid, and one was in Grand Lake. And I think that's a wonderful story. I'm going to tell you real quickly the rest of his story. Okay, this is the one that Donna gave me, this photo, at Corner Cupboard. And there he is and his uncle and the rest of the folks. After that, okay, is there another? Oops. No, keep going. Yeah, that's the same photo. There we go. Okay, here he is with his cousin, King Hussein of Jordan. They were, actually, they were very best friends. They both went to the Harrow School. And that was probably, it was taken in 1957 after both of them had been coronated either on the same day or the same year. Here he is. This is his official coronation portrait. I mean, I want to back it up. Keep in mind, he met with President of the United States, Jackie Robinson, and Grand Lake. I mean, put it in that context. Is that not just the most amazing thing? We need to remember, this is why I want this story to be remembered about Grand Lake. He was a dude, definitely. Okay, next, please. Okay, so his first state visit was with Queen Elizabeth, and that was because, of course, British oil. And they put on a show. The streets were lined with people waving flags. I've seen a video of it. So here they are. And next slide, please. Look at the grounds with the family, and then the formal state dinner that night in 1957 after he was king. So it's time to find a wife, and he decided on this princess. She's a Turkish princess. This is their engagement photo. Anyhow, so right after their engagement photo and such, I think it was in August of 1958, he was leaving one morning to go be with her 3 weeks before they were to be married. Before he could get out, there was a coup that surrounded the palace, and he negotiated exile with. It was just a small party. It actually was a very small party who organized this, and the head of the army didn't even know this was going to happen. So I think there's one more photo. Maybe that's it. No, yeah. So he negotiated this exile, and they called and said, the helicopters are on their way. Please come downstairs. They went downstairs. They were all lined up in the gardens, and machine guns were there. The whole family was executed and their ministers. A little bit like, the Tsar and Tsarina kind of story. The regent's wife did live. She played dead, and she was able to escape. So, he he would have been a much bigger story, and it would have been even more famous for us to have had him here if he had not died such a tragic death. What I've done is I found an article by Arab News that reflected, I think 60 years later, about what Iraq would be today if he had lived. This isn't by the USA Today, it is the Arab News. And I've made 50 copies and they'll be out front. So if you'd like to take one, just take one per family. But it's he was a wonderful man. My mother thought the world of just meeting him. And I do think that our world history would be different if it were, had not been for some roads. Okay, so last deal is I just can't thank y'all enough. And again, I want to say, I'll tell you, Grand Lake gives me peace of heart, and it gives me a peace in my heart that is there that I love to share. So thank you, and let's always know that Grand Lake is a very extraordinary place. Thank you.